All right, it is time. So welcome everybody. Little music here. Jason Mraz, thank you for your time joining me for 90 minutes or whatever you can spare today. We probably will go a little bit over, but let me dim this music as much as that song is fun and enjoyable. It is time to begin. All right, everybody. My name is Mr. Aguiar, or Mr. A, and that is for Research Application Methods. I am your instructor, and I'm here to guide your learning and your success. Learning means you're going to learn a whole lot about research application methods, specifically as it pertains to business, and even more specifically as it pertains to your role in business or leading a small business. So, or even a large business for that matter. So again, we'll get into all those details in just a minute. First, I want to welcome you. Open your chat windows if you would, and state what area you're from, just the region, please, region or state. We try to avoid cities or any too specific information, just to keep it general, and kind of say hi to each other. Now that those chat windows are for questions along the way, interactions, and even peer interactions. So that means you folks can interact with each other during the presentation. You can mention that you like something, or you thought something was interesting, or even add to the conversation, just so that we can make it interactive and conversational. So thank you so much. And if you have a name that you would rather be, you prefer to be mentioned by, in other words, I see Donna and Selena, and then Bethuel, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but again, just type it in, or even type the phonetic spelling of your name. Mr. A is why I prefer that, because some folks just have quite a bit of struggle pronouncing Aguiar, especially if it's not pronounced for them first. All right, well, glad you're here. We're going to go through a whole lot today. I'm just going to briefly mention our course dashboard, and here it is, our daily checkpoints, Shark, the live lesson, the course information, so much information. However, this is really your toolbox. This is your toolbox to allow you to be successful. And as far as what we're doing today is we are looking at a live session. It is the lecture, and there's going to be 2 labs this week. So if you wanted to plug in today, you would just click on live session and then go to the lecture link. If you're going to a lab from Miss Adams, and of course she's going to have 2 labs this week. She won't be having one later today, which is her normal schedule, because she's in Texas, and Texas is a whole lot of trouble with power, and she's one of those folks that experience that trouble. So we're not going to have her plug in today. So she'll reschedule that lab, and I'll send an announcement out later today so that everybody knows. All right, so we're going to now talk about what it means to be in research application methods. Notice it says here, exploring real world applications in statistics. But first, let's talk about your success plan. And so research has shown that your time is your greatest resource. So where you spend your time, including the time you're spending watching this lecture, is going to be the most success for your learning and for your performance. So if you can carve out this time, even if it's only part of the 90-minute lecture, it'd be great. And also, I'll be giving you the answers to the live lecture quiz today, so make sure you're aware of that. We'll talk about that, and I'll even point them out to you as I present them. And then the second one, it's not in order here because tenacity and timeliness are kind of work together, but the timeliness is getting things done on time. And I think the only tricky thing here is the first post on the discussions. Those are due on Wednesday. And so I think being mindful of that, because that doesn't really come up in Canvas. And so I think being mindful of that, first discussion due Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. Mountain time. So what time zone is everybody in? I'm in the Eastern time zone, and go ahead and type your time zones into the chat window just to kind of make sure you know I'm in Eastern. So that means I have to make the adjustments for the mountain times, and this is mountain time, Utah. So that way, for us at IU, we typically are asked to put all times in mountain. in the Mountain Time Zone. So that means you'll have to make that adjustment. So timeliness, getting things done on time. And again, the only tricky thing, other than all assignments due by Sunday, is that first discussion posts due Wednesday. Now, I do offer a 1-day grace period. And that 1-day grace period is to allow you an extra day for the second discussion post. So let me type that in there just so it's clear to you. So the second discussion main post can be submitted on Thursday. So I allow that because I experimented in research. I mean, my background is statistics and public health, and I ran an experiment to see if more students would submit discussions on time if they could focus on that first main post of discussion 1 and for discussion 2 have that first main post on Thursday. About half the students took advantage of that, and the success rate at which students posted their first main post on time was much higher. So I do allow that 1-day grace period for the second discussion main post. So to be clear and make sure there's no confusion, discussion 1 main post due Wednesday, and discussion 2 main post due Wednesday or Thursday. And that way you get it submitted on time. Now why? You may say, why can't it be due Sunday? Well, because 2 peer replies are due by Sunday for each post. All right. Now the peer replies are only 50 words and the main post are 150 words. Let me just finish typing this for each discussion. So the main post is 150 words. We'll get into how to be successful with these discussion posts, and Miss Adams, our lab instructor, is going to go through in much detail how to be successful. And the 2 peer replies are only 50 words each. The key is to be substantive, but we'll get into that. So the last thing I want to mention on this screen is your tenacity. What does tenacity mean in terms of success for you, for Selena, for Donna, for Bethuel, and so forth? That means you have to have the desire. That means the energy and the commitment to get the answers. That would require the daily readings, the daily checkpoints, making sure you read instructions carefully, don't rush. Speed and accuracy are inversely proportional. So really being mindful of that is super important. And of course, if you can't make the live lecture or the live labs, we record them. And so that's super great, right? So for any reason you can't make these, unfortunately, you'll miss out on some of the interaction, which is great, and some of the things we get to do together live. However, it is better than not having any information at all. And I also share the PowerPoint with you as well, so you'll have that available to you. So with that being said, these are my 3 T's of success: time, timeliness, and tenacity. Here is your instructor team information. We surround you with 3 people totally dedicated to helping you learn. I'm your principal instructor. We're called PIs. And so I will be running the live lectures and overseeing all the discussions, concepts, principles, deeper understandings. I'll be posting discussion posts as well. My commitment is to reply to your discussion post at some point during the mod. And so I reply to 4 for each discussion. So if you do the math, 4 for discussion 1, 4 for discussion 2. So that's 8. 8 times 4 is 32. There's 32 students in the course. So each person gets a reply from me. And then Nija Adams, Miss Adams, she's going to be your tactical person for live homework help. So she's going to be the one that's going to help you complete the assessments and the assignments and the discussions. If you need help with daily checkpoints, she could be there too. Now, those are timed. So if you're having trouble with a quiz question on a daily checkpoint, just send a text message over to her, or you can send it to me as well. And so you've got a contact information here. You can use Canvas, you can use the email, you can use the office number, and then you can use the phone or the text. I prefer Canvas, so that's my preference, but again, you can find out what Miss Adams prefers. And then we have a course tutor, Tyler Merce. So Mr. Merce is there for one-on-one meetings in foundational learning, basic mathematics, basic reading, sentence structure, writing, grammar, formatting papers, things like that. And of course, we have the Writing Center too, and we'll get into some details on the success of what it takes to be successful using the Writing Center as another resource. But these are your 3 main human beings that are dedicated to your learning and your success in the course. So again, Miss Adams, normally her lab times are Tuesdays. It takes place a few hours after the live lecture, so you can get some understanding of the weekly discussions, maybe some examples of what articles to use for your discussions, because that can be tricky for some folks. And then Thursday's nice because if you've gotten through that main post on discussions 1 and 2, you can start working on the assignment and the assessment. And so Tuesdays and Thursdays are her live labs, and of course we're all available through email, Canvas, text messaging. So know that that's always a resource for you. And here's Mr. Merset's hours. These will be posted each week. They change. So this week you can see that he's on Wednesday, 5 to 9 p.m., and then he's off the rest of the week. But again, the Writing Center is there for you. So he doesn't have many hours available this particular week, but no, you can always schedule something with him, and if not with him, with certainly one of the other instructor team members. All right. With all the information we have in the course, just know that you've got to pick and choose your time and how you manage it. And so I think of it as sprints versus marathons. We'll get into the details of that a little bit later on. So know that that's going to be something that we'll do together. But here's the overview, and you can see all the minutes and all the topics: business mistakes, statistics foundations, fake news, strategic planning, which is one of my favorite, Excel 2013, working with charts and graphs. So all these resources and reading and videos available to you, and these are the required reading for the course, so you can learn, gain a foundation, and really become equipped in your business role or the role you want to be in. And managing your time, this is the expected amount of time that you would spend each week. Not all of you will need all of this time. Some of you can come in with a higher learning performance than average, which is fine, but know that there is quite a few hours required for success. So please be committed to at least carving out the time necessary for your success. All right, and here's all the topical outlines. Again, you can find this in the course information on our course dashboard, but I just wanted to present it to you in this first PowerPoint and live lecture, just so you'd have it. 4 weeks with lots to talk about. And this week, our focus is manipulation and deception of numbers and sales determinations. And then, of course, working with limited resources. So those will be the 2 main topics for today, and we'll go through that in detail enough for you to be successful and create a foundation for your learning for week 1. And here's our course task list, and we'll get into this in summary, but I also post this in our discussion board, excuse me, our announcement board. So I put links there. I make it as easy as I can for you to be successful. But again, these task lists are available to you just so you'll have them in these PowerPoints, and you can refer to them if you need to. But of course, it's on the course homepage as well. So I did a little bit of an update to the PowerPoint. I created a few more slides. I'll send out the revised version in the announcement, where I also post the live lecture recording. And yes, we're being recorded, including our comments. So what is RAM110? Well, RAM stands for Research Application Methods. And so we're looking to explore real world applications. So this means we're going to explore some common things that happen in business and is statistically related. So what does statistically mean? Well, it means we're going to analyze, and we're going to study, and we're going to create. Create what? Well, we're going to create graphs. We're going to create survey techniques, or at least understand them. We're going to analyze data. So we're going to calculate what's called measures of center. Those are things like a mean, also known as an average, a median, a mode, and then you get to advanced techniques like trimmed means and things like that. And so the emphasis will be placed on using and understanding graphs, using and understanding basic business concepts, using and understanding statistical analysis as it relates to data, and of course, thinking and strategic planning. So that's talking about logical reasoning and using your emotion and your intuition. And so all of these things work together as a complete package for optimal performance. Now, if you can't be in your own business role optimal, how can the business expect to be optimal? So really, it's a sum of the parts, because you may say, well, I'm not a leader, I'm not a manager, I'm not a director. How can I be successful in business or help my company be successful? By being successful in your role. Business success really comes down to design, and execution. The right design and the right execution will give you business success. And of course, being adaptable to change is another big piece of it. And we'll get into that in more detail. So here's our first official question. How can research help you in your current or future business role? So there's no wrong answer here, but type into the chat window how research, try and make it brief, not too wordy, but how do you think research can help you in your current or future business role? And for me, I'll talk about my healthcare roles. I was a strategist, so I worked for a major hospital and health systems, and these are hospital and health systems that did $1 billion worth of revenue, had $1 billion worth of gross revenue each year. And so these systems would have to plan for the future. And so that was strategic planning, basically creating a plan from where you are now to where you want to be. And so research for me helped me determine what were the priorities I needed to focus on, what were the strengths of the organization, what were the weaknesses. So how do we continue to be strong in the areas of strength? And how do we go and address the weak areas and improve them? And so that's one of the areas in healthcare strategy that I used in my role to help make our business successful. Efficiency was a big deal. Now, efficiency is simply higher performance for lower cost. So you have a more outcome or a better outcome for a lower cost. That's really what efficiency comes down to. And so that's right, Selena. You definitely have to have the right information of what you're going for. But you'll absolutely, these insights into what you should be doing and how you should be doing it will absolutely aid you. And Donna, no question, we have to know what direction we're going in, right? If we go really fast, and I love this analogy. So if we're going to run a race and we're going to move super fast, let me even capitalize it, super fast. Okay, how important is it that we go in the right direction? Because we can say, look how fast we're moving. All our workers are busy. We're all busy doing all these things. But if we're not moving in the right direction, then how could we possibly be successful? So we have to go super fast, but better to move in the right direction, even if it's slowly, right? Move in the right direction. Okay, so super fast is good, but the right direction is better. So I think being mindful of that, both speed and accuracy are inversely proportional. So we have to be careful how fast we move, but certainly always good to move in the right direction. All right. Thank you for participating in that student question. And let's move on to our week 1 deliverables. So this is your tactical plan for success. I post this in an announcement each week. So let's go through this to make sure you can have some success in the week. So your daily reading requirements, make sure you address those and carve out at least an hour of time probably for that, or a couple of hours if you had to skip a day. Your daily checkpoints, this is where you start earning points, 5 points for each daily checkpoint, minimum of 4 are required each week, and then the remaining 3 are extra credit. So that accounts for, do the math, 5 points times 7, that's 35 points a week, times 4, that adds up to 140 points or 14% of your grade. So really being mindful of that is huge because it can really be a grade boost for you. And then introduce yourself. This is just a little extra where you introduce yourself and say hi to your peers, say hi to me, talk about some right numbers, specifically as it relates to the pandemic. There's no points there, but it is nice if you could just, get a few sentences written for an introduction, and I'll be responding to your introduction posts this week. Discussion 1, can numbers really lie? Well, let's all agree that numbers can't speak. So we can all agree that numbers can't speak, so they can't specifically lie, but they certainly can be misleading. They can be presented as a lie by people who either intentionally or unintentionally presented them that way. And for your awareness, most numbers, when there are mistakes, when there are misconceptions, usually it's not intentional. The research has shown that most misinformation is unintentional versus those things that are intentional. So either way, it's something that it's important that we recognize. Discussion 2, resource allocation. And again, discussion 1 post, main post due Wednesday, and discussion 2 main post, I'll even emphasize that with some text, main post due Wednesday. And main post for discussion, because of the 1-day grace period, I'm giving you until Thursday if you need it. preferably Wednesday, but if not, don't worry about it. Please get to it by Thursday. And then the assignment. Look at this points, 90 points. That's more than a third of your grade is woven into this assignment because that's 90 each week. 90 times 4 is 360 points out of 1,000 points. That's 36% of your grade. So more than a third of your grade is in the assignments. So just missing one assignment could cause serious trouble in your performance. So really being mindful of completing the assignments and those discussions, the bulk of your grades come out of that. And because a lot of folks worry about the assessment because it's a quiz. There's going to be 10 questions in this assessment. Trust me, you're going to ace the assessment. Once you find out the keys to success on that assessment, you will be getting, 50 out of 50, 44 out of 50, 42 out of 50. You'll be getting great grades on the assessment once you understand how that all works. And then the live lecture quiz. That's 4 questions and 4 answers. And so that's something that you'll have available to you. And again, I'm going to give you one question right now, which is a type of capital that we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a preview. It's a type of capital that involves volunteering, and that's called social capital. So if you want to put that answer down, social capital involves a type of volunteering. And so just know that that's information that you can use for the live lecture quiz. That's one of the 4 questions. And now you have it, and you're 1/4 of the way to being completely successful in getting that live lecture 20-point quiz to assist with your performance. Jacob, welcome to the conversation, and hello, and thank you for sharing what you think about research. All right, so any questions? We'll pause right here. If there's any questions you want me to ponder over to the right, I'm going to take a look at those in just a second as we discuss our learning objectives for this week. So there are 4 learning objectives. It seems like a lot, and it is a lot, but we're going to create a foundation for the next 4 weeks. We've got to do it well. All right. Yes, Selena, absolutely. Sometimes when we think of completing things, we often overthink it. So let me get back to. I'm going to answer Selena's question. Selena, I'm going to send you a message here privately, and I'll get you the name of our tutor. It's also under live on our course webpage under your instructor team in the announcements section. I'll get that name over to you. All right. So 4 things. Resource allocation. We must, in business, make sure we allocate resources appropriately. Now, there's all kinds of resources, right? There's financial resources. There's capital resources. There's human capital, like human resources. There's supplies. There's services. There's support. There's vendors. There's contract employees. I mean, there's so much, right? How do you organize it all? Well, you start with basics, and we're going to create those basics, and then we're going to talk about challenges when resources are limited. Next, in the second one, we're going to calculate gross and net sales. Why? Because sales is an important part of business. As a matter of fact, it's vital to business. You must make money in order to make profit. And so therefore, the gross and net sales of your product, the gross and net sales of your services, we need to understand that in its basic form and then grow into more complex topics. We're going to calculate the central tendency, the mean, the median, and the mode. We'll go into those details. And then lastly, identifying manipulation and deception of numbers. We'll also identify 3 ways numbers can be deceptive. And again, let's just all agree, numbers don't lie because they don't speak, but numbers can be perceived as misinformation, misconceptions, and of course, mistakes. And the most common one is simply mistaken because folks that are presenting the numbers are mistaken themselves or just misinformed themselves. All right, so our basic vocabulary of economics. So we're just going to go through some terms. I'm not going to spend too much time here. It's just creating a foundation for our language. So the use of numbers for business decisions. So how are they used? 1, they transform data into useful information. That's a big deal, right? We take raw numbers and we use it as useful information to gain understanding and inform decision makers. Probably one of the most foundational uses of business information when it comes to numbers is for us to be able to make decisions, to be able to plan for the future, to be able to react to something positive, to be able to react to something negative. That's a very big deal, and we must understand how to use that information and make sure the information is valid and reliable and timely. Secondly, quantify and identify risks and uncertainty. things happened. The pandemic happened. Who was ready for that? And so how do we respond when those things happen in a manner that helps our business mitigate what it needs to? So many businesses went out of business. So many large corporations closed stores. And so these are the things that are natural responses to times where financial resources are scarce because of things like happened in the last year and still going on today. And then third, understand and reduce variation and bias. Now, these are two new terms that may seem foreign to you, and that's okay, because we're going to talk about variation. It's just how numbers vary, how they differ. And then bias is when the truth isn't properly represented for some reason. And so there could be bias in opinions, bias in decisions, bias in statistical methods. And so these things exist, and we'll get into all the details around that. But this is just an overview of some of use of numbers in business decisions, and not, of course, an exhaustive list, but something we can build upon. So our basic vocabulary. So let's talk about what a pure market economy is. A pure market economy. It's an economic system in which the economic decisions, pricing of goods and services, are solely guided by the interactions of the country's individuals, citizens, and businesses. Meaning the people and the businesses make the economy. That means there's little or no government intervention. That's a pure market economy, solely determined by what consumers are willing to pay. Very rare in the world, certainly not true in the United States, but there is some submarkets where it is driven solely by that. But in general, a pure market economy is not something that really exists at the government level, but certainly in small pockets can exist. Second, command economy. This is an economy where the production, the investment, the prices, incomes, things like that are centrally controlled by the government. So a command economy, government controlled, pure economy, a consumer driven. And then a mixed economy, which is what most economies in the world have. And this is where it's part driven by some government intervention, some government oversight, but it's also driven by consumers and consumer demands, consumer pricing, and things like that. So that mixed economy really is the both going on. Both government, some government entities are controlling things, some private entities are controlling things, but really it comes down to a mix of both government entities and the private sector. So some differences just to highlight them. The pure market economy does not contain external forces fixing prices, so there's no government intervention. The command economy and factories here are directed, or businesses are directed what to produce, where to produce it, how to produce it, and what price to sell it at. And that mixed economy is where you have both social interaction with the public and you have interactions with the government or oversight by the government. Think of it as regulatory control. And so both of those work together. And in most industries in the United States, there is both. There's some higher government oversight, like in healthcare, there's a higher government oversight. In the insurance business, there's a higher government oversight. Whereas in retail, other than the food quality and all the rules governing that, there's more. You get to put your prices out there for what you want. And so an equilibrium. So now that we've talked about the pure market economy and the mixed economy, when really the mixed is really the most common, let's talk about what equilibrium stands for. That's when economic forces are balanced, which means supply equals demand. So when supply equals demand, there's a balance between what is needed and what is available. So this is just a picture of what supply and demand could look like. And of course, what happened if we go back to the pandemic for the toilet paper catastrophe. I mean, for some reason, it got started that we're going to lose toilet paper. And so toilet paper was flying off the shelves. Supply went way down because demand went way up. And so prices started to go up and limits were put in place, and there was no toilet paper on the shelves. We were in our own house counting rolls of toilet paper just to see how long we could last. And so it's thank goodness it's not the case anymore, but it was certainly a time where things were completely out of balance and out of equilibrium. And of course that can happen, and when it does happen, it does affect price. So it is important to realize that. And so here's a picture of it. So we look at a supply and demand curve. As supply goes up, prices can go up as well, if depending on the demand. And then demand, if demand goes up, then price goes up as well. So it depends on how that works together. So on the price floor and the price ceiling, we're basically saying here that if a certain supply goes up and the demand goes down, that tends to lower prices. If demand goes up and supply goes down, then that tends to increase prices. And so it's a little bit of a complex graph, and we're not going to go into it in too much detail. You're not going to be tested on this, but it is nice to have a simple definition of what surplus is: high supply, low demand, surplus, and then high demand and low supply, shortage. All right, some more terms we should be familiar with. The role of a project manager. As a matter of fact, you may be a project manager, and this is the person in overall charge of planning and execution of a project. Large companies typically have these project managers, and they tend to experience greater organizational success because the work's being done how? More efficiently and effectively. So efficient and effective are two words that you're going to see a lot in business if you haven't already. Think of efficient as doing something better at a lower cost or results in a lower cost. And so it's different than innovation. We'll get to innovation later. Efficiency is basically doing something better or doing something at a lower cost that doesn't hurt value or effectiveness. And effective is something that makes a difference, a positive difference for the company. And so you want to make a positive difference for the company, you're going to be effective. You want to be efficient, you're going to do something either better or is equal to what you're doing now at a lower cost. And then secondly, resource allocation. So resource allocation is the process of allocating scarce resources, or at least resources in general, among various projects or business units. And of course, that involves this key word, and I'm going to highlight it: prioritization. If we're going to manage something, we must prioritize, just like your time. You must prioritize your time. And so if you are working and you have children and you're in school, you've got to manage your schedule, and different priorities may be on different days, but you need to manage your schedule in a way that prioritizes what is important that given day. So if the children are in school, then you need to manage, how they get to school, how they get to the school setting, et cetera, et cetera. You need to have your management of your time for your business and your work and all the hours required for that. Then you need to have time to pick up supplies for your home and food, and then you need time for school. So again, prioritizing these things are super important if you're going to be what? Efficient and effective. Well, if it's true for what you're doing now, think of how important it is for your business or your role in business, the efficiency and the effectiveness of what you do. All right, so I think you can clearly understand this importance of managing your time, and specifically a project manager, and how they allocate resources to be successful. Normative economics. These are just value judgments about economic fairness. And so this comes from public policies. It comes from the general public. It's driven by consumers and business leaders. So these are how people feel things should happen in the economy, what people believe is economic fairness. And then a closed community is where no imports are brought in. And typically it's no exports as well. And so no imports, no exports. This is highly unusual, but it can happen. Closed communities will have no imports and exports. And now, why is it so rare? Because it's hard to have all the things you need in a community within the community. Now, some could argue that can happen given the right geographic location, given the right type of people with the right talents and the right resources, sure, but it's not common. But it is good to know that that exists, these closed community concepts and normative economics, just to add to our vocabulary around economics. Some more basic terms: a variable. Now we're getting into the statistical side of economics. This is a characteristic of an item or an individual. And so just a simple example would be something like age or gender or your zip code. So these are all variables that have data associated with them. And the data would be numerical information associated with the variable. Now, I mentioned gender And if we talk about just male and female, just for this example, if I'm going to code that, I typically would just assign a number to the gender. And it doesn't have to be one versus two. It could be 0 and 1. It doesn't matter if it's male first or female first. As far as ones or twos, the number doesn't have sizable meaning. Some people will code things, like 11 or 22. It really doesn't matter. You just want to keep it simple in your coding techniques. And then finally, the data set contains those values. And so if we're going to have ages, and I'm not going to suggest anybody puts their age in the chat window, but if we did, then we would have the variable age. The data would be the total number of years that you've attained in your age. So we probably wouldn't use a decimal. And then the data set would just be the combination of ages associated with this. And why is that important? Well, think about the census, right? With the census, the 2020 census went out. They weren't able to collect all the information, but they collected enough information to do some estimates. And so they asked for age. They wanted to know what age, or at least what age group, the individuals were that were living in the home. And so that was information that goes to the government, and the government makes decisions based on that, and that census is tracked for our country. More vocabulary: categorical or qualitative variables. These are variables, because we just talked about variables, that don't have sizable meaning. They're just categoricals. So these were things like yeses and nos. So if we had a question like, are you living in the Eastern time zone? And if you answer yes, then that would be coded one number. If you answer no, I'm not in the Eastern time zone, that would be coded another number. Did you vote in the last presidential election? Yes or no? Things like that. And so, and by the way, who did vote in the last presidential election? That's not too politically sensitive. So yes, I voted. And it's okay if you didn't. And some of you may not be able to vote, and that's okay. True or false is another question. So true or false. I could ask the question about the presidential election. True or false? Did you vote you voted in the last presidential election? Is that true or false? Color. What is your favorite color? I could ask that question. Zip code. We're not going to mention zip codes because that's more personal information. And then, of course, gender, as I mentioned before. So these are just some examples of categorical variables. As a matter of fact, I might have a poll here. Yeah, I'm going to launch this poll. And so what I did is I asked, what car color would you pick if you were going to get a new car and you got to pick your favorite color? Which one would you pick if you were given these choices? So take a minute to do that. And this is a categorical variable. And so this is just an example of what I could potentially use in a survey, or if I'm in a car dealership and I'm trying to get the most popular colors for folks in my region, I may just do a general public survey. All right, so just another few seconds here. What car color would you pick if you were to get a new car? All right. And now I'll share the results with you. And so each of you chose your different color. I would choose silver because there's this new color coming out. It's kind of a silver blue. So that would have been my choice, but it doesn't let me do my own my own poll. It just lets me do yours. So I could code black 1, blue 2, green 3, orange 4, red 5, silver 6, and white 7. Just simple numeric coding. And then my data would be 2, 3, and 5. That would be the data that I would have in our little poll here. All right, well, great. And thank you for participating in that. All right, so we're now going to move to numerical data. Now that's different than categorical data because this is where the numbers have sizable meaning. And there's two types of numbers. One is discrete, and these are basically counts. Number of kids that you have, number of people who live in your house. I could ask the number of students in my class. Those are discrete because they're counted variables. And then continuous variables are measurement variables. They typically have decimal places. So this could be how tall you are, not just in feet and inches, but how tall are you, even if we use decimal places to get the actual height or weight or your blood pressure. All of those things would be continuous variables. Length, height, width, time would be another example of a continuous variable. And here's a bunch of examples that you can look at. The variables we talked about, remember a value that measures something, that's just the variable, and it's split into categorical And all these different examples that we haven't mentioned yet: eye color, political party affiliation, marital status, and then numerical, split into two parts: discrete and continuous. So that way you can have some examples for these: number of kids, number of defects, number of cars, counted values. And then the continuous ones are measurement, numerical measurements: length, width, height, voltage, pressure, speed, time. So here's a question I have for you. Where do you think currency falls? Money. In the chat window, give a guess. No wrong answers here, folks. So where do you think currency would fall? Would it be categorical? I don't think so, right? Because it's numerical, right? You have more money, you have the number goes up. You know, you think of your bank account balance. So do you think it would be discrete or continuous? So discrete numerical or continuous numerical? Give a guess. Continuous, Jacob, thank you. Who else? Selena, thank you. Continuous. Numerical, thank you, Donna. Answer is discrete. The answer is discrete. It's a count. Money is a count of pennies. That's all right. It's a count of pennies. Our penny in the United States is the basic measurement unit of currency. So whenever you say how much money do you have in the bank, you're actually displaying a number that counts pennies. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, not that important. It's treated like a continuous. For those of you that said continuous, trust me, you're right on. You hit the nail on the head, because that's how currency is treated. It's treated as a continuous variable. So no worries there. That's why I said no wrong answer. And thank you for participating in that. So just some things to ponder. Numerical literacy. We need to better understand numbers if we're going to understand data, which will help us understand the analysis that is behind the data, and then understanding the information that we get from the analysis. So just some ponderances. When do numbers present or represent useful information? This is a huge question, because so much data out there. But listen to me. This is you're right, Jacob. It was a trick question. Useful. What's useful? Think for a second. What's useful to you? In social media, with all the things flying around, the pandemic and economies and business and salaries, I don't know if you've calculated how much you would make once you graduate, and what role you could potentially play, and where your jobs would most likely be available: online, in person, in health systems or education systems or retail or small business. So useful information basically is things that we need to make our decisions and our plans, or a better understanding of what the present is. So really governing what is useful and what is not is a big deal. All right. Next, when are differences in numbers presented as meaningful versus simply due to chance? So meaningful means there's a difference that is quantifiable. You can actually see the difference, understand the difference, and it truly is different, versus just one number is different because it came from a sample, and the sample didn't represent the whole population, and this number came from another sample, and although the numbers are different, they're only different due to chance, not because it's a meaningful difference. And then third question, patterns. We're going to look at what's observed in large amounts of data. Is it meaningful? Again, useful, meaningful, getting into that trend. And causality is the next one. And I'll give you a little example about claims of causality. So there is a relationship between ice cream and crime. There is a relationship between ice cream and crime. When ice cream sales go up, crime goes up. And you're thinking, is there causality? That means one is causing the other to increase. So one increase is causing the other to increase. The answer is no. There is no causality between ice cream sales and crime rates. Then why do they both go up? Summertime. So crime rates go up in the summertime. Ice cream sales go up in the summertime. They're both related to a third variable, time. And so time is the governance between the relationship between ice cream sales and crime, but it's not causal. Now, what about speed and braking distance? What do you think of the relationship between speed, I'll even type it in the chat window, and braking distance? Do you think the faster you go, the longer it takes to brake? Do you think those two are causal, meaning the higher speed will mean your braking distance will also be higher if you slammed on the brakes? What does everybody think about that? Just type your answer into the chat window. Do you think those two variables are causal? The higher speed is causing a greater braking distance if you're driving a car. And the answer, if you haven't thought about it or you're still typing or thinking, the answer is yes. Those two are causal. The faster you go, the longer it'll take to brake. That's an example of a causal relationship. So think about these things now that you're learning this. Think about incorporating this into your learning as we build a foundation of this information. All right. So in business, numerical literacy, that means understanding data, plays a fundamental and important role. How? We get to visualize and summarize business data. That means we get to look at graphs and better understand them. We get to describe the methods used to create these charts. We're gonna actually build a bar chart later in the course. And of course, drawing conclusions from these charts helps us make decisions to either learn from the past, to assess the present, or to plan for the future. Those are three things that you're going to hear me talk a lot about. Again, learning from the past, assessing the present, and planning for the future. Third, to make reliable forecasts about business activities. So that means we want to make sure we plan well. We don't just plan for the future, but we plan well. And you'll see this term inferential methods. And so let me highlight that, because that's basically meaning where data from a sample is taken to generalize about a population. So conclusions are made about a larger group taking data from a smaller group. That's called inferential or inferencing in statistics. So we're using statistical models, we're using data that is valid and reliable and timely, and we're making some conclusions around it so that we can best, again, learn from the past, assess the present, and plan for the future. And a fourth element is to improve business processes. This is efficiency, right? We talked about this. This is efficiency. When we're making an improvement, we are creating efficiencies. And those efficiencies help us to run the business better at a lower cost. And so that's really a big deal. We haven't got to innovation yet. We'll get to innovation. And so that's really more of advancing the business, but at least knowing efficiencies can happen right now. Even in your own schoolwork, you can create efficiencies. All right, so here's a question for you. In business, how important is understanding and tracking supply and demand? And think about the retail industry. Think about restaurants. Think about hotels. Think about Home Depots and Costco's and Walmarts. Yes, huge, right? It's hugely important. Huge. I don't know if any of you know Bernie Sanders, but the way he says huge is remarkable. Huge. It's huge. And so if I can steal one word from that man, it would be the word huge. And supply and demand is a big deal. And something to think about, and I'm going to type this into the chat window as well. What about this? What do you think about that? Because it costs money to inventory something. As a matter of fact, has anybody heard about some of the coronavirus vaccines were wasted because they were sitting on the shelves and then the shelf life passed or the due date passed? Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, that was a big deal, Selena, the toilet paper catastrophes of 2020. And in the pandemic, there's been some news about some of the virus vaccines that had to be thrown away because they weren't used in time because of the shelf life. And so that was a waste. And whenever you waste something, you lose money. You don't get to reuse it. You don't get to recycle it. You don't get to, reapportion it to some other use. So that is something that you try to avoid completely, is making sure that you don't waste something by just having to throw it away. All right, so that's our first big section. There's a wealth of information. I get it, and that's why the PowerPoint's there to refer to. So know that you don't have to absorb all this information instantaneously. That's not expected of any of you, but it is something that helps us kind of build the foundation of our learning. So next, we're going to go into measures of central tendency and mean, median, and mode, and we'll go through this and give some examples. All right, first, the mean is the average of all the values in a sample or population. It equates to the sum of the data divided by the number of data values. You calculate the mean by adding the data up, dividing by the number of values. And the notation for that is simply mu, this Greek letter mu. That's for population mean. Okay. This is the Greek letter sigma, and then X stands for data. All right, so sum the data, and then capital N is the number of data values. That's for the population mean. For the sample mean, the notation is X bar. It's called X bar. It's sigma, sum of the sample data, sum of X, divided by the sample size, or the number of sample data values, which is little n. So that's just notation. In general, we're just going to add the data up, divide by the number of data values, and we've got the mean. Fairly straightforward. The median, rather, it's different. It doesn't use all the data like the mean does, because remember, the mean adds up all the data. The median just looks at a center point of the data set where the middle value is calculated. So that means the data set's going to be ordered. You're going to look at the middle point. It's also referred to as the 50th percentile. So the median and the 50th percentile are the same thing. And let me just draw a line. Let me see if it allows me to do this. And oh, look at that. Those mean the same thing, the median and the 50th percentile. And the notation for the median, it's simply capital M for the population median and little m for the sample median. And you may ask, well, Mr. A, when would we, perform, like a population median? Well, think of it as you're the principal of a school, and you want to know the median grade point average. The median grade point average. That would be a population, right? So you have your whole school, you calculate all the grades, and then you find the middle grade value. That's the median. That would be a population. Now, what if you were taking all of the students in North Carolina and you sampled 5 schools randomly? Well, if you're sampling 5 schools out of all the schools in North Carolina, that would be a sample, and that would be a sample median if you used all of that data. So that's just a quick example of how we would use a population versus a sample. Calculating a median. So the ways to do it. So the tactical way to calculate a median is to first order the data from smallest to largest, or largest to smallest. Just basically put it in numerical order. If the number of data values is odd, there is a middle value, and we'll see that in an example. If the number of data values is even, if there's an even number of data values, the median is the average or the midpoint of those 2 middle values. And again, we'll see that in an example here. All right, examples of first calculating a mean. So let me just stress, we're calculating a mean. So sample mean, I use sample data. So I know we just talked about median, but this first example is mean. So we've got some commuter distance data in miles. There are 10 values. Okay, if you add up all these numbers, 3 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7, add them all up, you get what? 65. And then you take 65, divide by 10, and you get 6.5. All right, that's how you calculate the average or the mean. Next, GPA. We've got all these different GPAs measured to 2 decimal places. How many? 8 of them. And what if we added up all those GPA numbers? They would add up to 28.03. So you could do this in Excel, you could do this on a calculator, and 28.03 divided by 8, that gets you 3.504. Okay. And then lastly, car prices. Does a car really cost 21.7? No, but we used thousands of dollars for a unit. So if the thousands of dollars is used as a unit, that is basically dividing the car price by 1,000. So that's what 21.7 represents in the car prices. So we add up all these data values here, we add them all up, and what do you get? You get 200.3, and then you divide by 7. It's not a division symbol, I get it, but I'm just using this as a reference. And then you get 28.61 as the mean. Now, something to point out, significant digits or levels of accuracy. Notice that in the raw data here for commuter distance, let me just get some shaded information. Hold on. In the raw data here, there was no decimals, but in the sample mean, there is a decimal. This is very common. When you calculate an average, it's very common to use one decimal place more accurate than the original data. So is it a rule? No, it's not a rule. You get to do your own statistics. You get to round off to whatever you want to round off to. However, do you always go one decimal place more accurate? No. Why not? Because it may not make sense to people. GPA. If I said, class, my GPA was 3.504, that will not make sense to a whole lot of people because they'll say, I thought GPAs were in 2 decimal places. So what we do in this example is we would just round off to 3.50. And that way we can have a number that makes sense to the audience. You don't need that 3rd decimal place. It's not like we're doing some fancy schmancy statistical test. We just need a number that makes sense to our audiences. And whether we're using currency, whether we're using GPA, whatever it is, just try to have it make sense to your audience. Otherwise, it could create more confusion than it would create for a benefit. Here's an example of calculating a median. So let's get into this calculation. Again, this is the median. So we're moving from mean to median. Same data, commuter distance. There are 10 values. That's an even number. So 10 is an even number. So we're going to go into this data set and we're going to identify the 2 middle values. I put them over here, 6 and 7. And if we take the midpoint or the average of those two, it's 6.5. So 6 plus 7 divided by 2. And then GPA, 8 values. It's an even number. The 2 middle values here are right there, 3.33 and 3.50. I listed them over here on the table as well. If we take the average of those, we get 3.415. And then finally, car prices in thousands of dollars. That's an odd numbered data set. That means there are 7 numbers, not uneven numbered. The middle number is 25.5. I listed it here. I listed it here as well under sample median. There's no calculation there. All right, here's a question for you. What number would I put for the average GPA if I only wanted to use 2 decimal places? Using normal rounding rules, what decimal place, and I'll get to your question, Selena, what decimal place would I use for the sample median of the GPA? So I'll just highlight it here, 3.415. How would I round that to 2 decimal places? Okay, well, I'd go 3.4. Would the 1 go up to a 2 or would the 1 stay at a 1? Well, in normal rounding rules, the 1 would go up to a 2. Why? Because the number next to the 1 to the right of it is a 5. And so whenever there's a 5 or a higher number, then the number next to it goes up to the next higher digit. So 3.42. So Selena asked, where does the number 2 come from? Well, let's carve this out. I'm going to highlight this. So here are 2 numbers, just count them, right? 3.33 is 1 number, 3.50 is 2 numbers. And if we're going to take the average, think of what the definition of average is. We're taking the average of just those 2 numbers, we add them up and divide by the number of data values. So 2 is the number of data values used in the calculation. So just the number of data values used in those middle numbers that we're taking out of the data set. And then 6 and 7 is the same thing. There's 2 numbers right there. So just count them. 6 is 1. 7 is your second number. And so when we take 6 plus 7 divided by 2, we get 6.5. So I'll just put that in the chat window as well. So the median is 6 plus 7 divided by 2 and that equals 6.5. So the 2 is simply the number of digits used in the calculation to find the middle, because there is no single number in the middle of an even data set. Whenever you have an even number data set, you have to take the 2 middle values, and that's where the 2 comes from. Good. Any other questions? Cool. All right. So comparison, mean versus median. Well, the mean expresses an average of all the data values, okay? An average of all the data values, okay? And since it uses all the data values, it's also sensitive to extreme values. Well, what do you mean? Well, imagine if we had a commuter distance to work and we had a distance like, let me get some distances in here. All right, so commuter distance, and we had 5, 4, 5, 10, and then somebody drives 400 miles to work. Think of what would happen if that 400 miles, if you're calculating an average, how that 400 miles plays a role in that commuter distance. It's going to really increase the average because it uses all the data values. So the mean is sensitive to extreme values, or what's called skewed data sets, which we'll get into a little later. The median expresses just the middle of a data set, okay, just the middle. Okay, think of it as horse blinders, just looking at the middle. It uses only the center of the data set, and it's not sensitive to outliers or skewed distributions. As a matter of fact, if we were to take the median of the data set that I put here, I would simply take the average of these 2 middle values, 5 and 10. And so if I were to calculate that, I would say the median equals 5 plus 10 divided by 2, and that would be 15 divided by 2, or 7.5. So think how different the median would be from the mean because of that outlier or extremely high value of commuter distance of 400, which would be calculated into the mean. So medians and means are different, but they're both valid. Very important to know, both valid. So here's a question for you. Which value is better? Type into the chat window which you think is what value is better, and see which value you think is a better value, the mean or the median, or which do you like better, or you could like them both, or you could like neither of them. What do you think is your opinion on the mean versus the median? No wrong answers here. Anyone? Well, here's the actual answer. My answer is it depends on what you want to measure. If you want the middle, then yes, you would use the median. If you want an average, if you want all the data used in the calculation, you would use an average. And I know some of you are hesitant because you maybe have not been introduced to this term. That's perfectly okay. Nothing wrong with that. So here's an example of using the mean versus the median. In 2019, it was calculated that the US household median income was $63,030. And so the average number of persons in each house was about 4. So this was a median household income for about 4 people living in a home, 2 adults, 2 kids. So that's in 2019. In 2019, the US household mean income, same households, same data, but it calculated the average rather than the median income, and it was 89,930. Both of those values are valid. This one just happens to represent the middle, and the second term just happens to represent the average. And they're both valid. So you could see in an article where they're talking, hey, we calculated the median income, and then this other article calculates, hey, we calculated the average income of the US household. And these two numbers are very different though, right? They tell such a different story. Now we got to remember, if Bill Gates data, and it is in US household income, his data doesn't affect the 63,000 number, right? Because he's way out there, super high income for his household, because we're looking at the middle. So he's an extreme value. He's not impacting that median other than the fact that he's on the right-hand side of it. However, Bill Gates' income is in the mean. So the Gates family is included in the US mean income. So what story do you want to tell? Where the money is flowing in the United States on the average, or what is the 50th percentile or the median family making in the US? You're going to see a lot of these numbers, especially in financial reports, in economic reports. Sometimes politics will drive some of this information. So just know both of them are valid. Both of them are calculated to a reasonable degree of accuracy. However, know that they definitely tell a bit of a different story. Other measures of center, the mode, the most frequently reoccurring value in a data set that's used in this week's assignment. This is the number that occurs most frequently. And then something that's not as common is a p% trimmed mean, a trimmed mean. That's not as common, but what it does is it trims off some of the highest values, some of the lowest values. They all get trimmed to some percent, and then the remaining values are averaged. This is typically done when you have a data set like in our hospital data that we used when I was in healthcare. We would trim off for length of stay when we calculated the number of days that people stayed in the hospital. Some people stayed like 400 days. And so we would trim off folks that stayed, extremely high, or some folks just stayed 1 or 2 days, and we trim off both sides. And a common trim that we would use is a 5% trim mean. So the 5% highest values and the 5% lowest values were trimmed from the data set, removed, and then the remaining data was left. We calculated an average of the remaining data. Some examples of calculating a mode, commuter distance. Here's our example again. And of course, we're looking for the number that occurs most frequently. So here's a couple of 3s, here's a couple of 8s. They're both occurring twice, so there's 2 modes. GPA, no mode. Why? None of the data values repeat. Okay, so no mode. And here for car prices, again, no mode. However, if you round to the nearest 5,000ths, if you round to the nearest $5,000, then something does come out of here as reoccurring. And so again, only if you round the data, and then 25 would have been, or 25,000 would have been the mode if you rounded the car price. So just some examples of numbers being worked in action here. And our calculations for assessment number, first week's assignment is going to be calculating a sample mean, or a mean rather, and calculating a mode. So we'll be calculating a mean and a mode in the first assignment. All right, so anybody have a calculator handy? So if we were to trim 10% of this data, so that means we're going to get rid of the first value, and we're going to get rid of the last value. We're left with this data set down here. And so if you get your calculators out and you add these numbers up and divide by 6, why 6? Well, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data values. That's why we divide by 6. So if you take those numbers up and divide by 6, what do you get? So if you got a calculator, give that a shot. I'll give you a minute to do that. Meanwhile, I'm going to get you the answer to another question on this week's quiz. All right. And the question is, this is the live lecture quiz. These types of resources can be created by business, its vendors, its employees, and potentially all human relationships. Okay. And it's called social capital. That's called social capital. I'll even put it in the chat window for you so that you don't have to, busy and write it down. So here's the question. There it is. And the answer, social capital. All right. So now that you have another question and answer from today's or this week's live lecture quiz, you got 2 of them down, one couple more to go. Anybody able to calculate that mean, the trimmed mean? 3.49. That's the answer, 3.490. So that's basically adding those 6 numbers up, dividing by 6, and you get 3.49. I'll leave that on your own for time purposes. We got to move on. So here's a video. We're going to just take a break, watch this video, and I'll be right back afterward.
The true death toll from COVID-19 is revealed in the latest official figures from the Office for National Statistics. They've looked at the average number of people who would be expected to die for the time of year in England and Wales. and they added in the death registrations for 2020. In all, there have been more than 46,000 extra deaths between the start of the epidemic in March and the beginning of May. These excess deaths, as they're called, include not just those with COVID-19 recorded on their death certificate, but also deaths attributed to other causes. And the stats show there were 13,000 extra non-COVID-19 deaths over this period. Of these, the biggest increase over the long-term average was in deaths attributed to dementia, up 52%. It's likely that these were care home residents whose lives were cut short by the virus, even if that wasn't reflected on their death certificate. And there's also been a big increase in deaths from causes such as asthma and diabetes. In mid-April, they spiked at 197% and 161% above average. And they were outside hospital, so it's likely to reflect a reluctance to seek medical attention during the epidemic. But a second report by the ONS shows the epidemic is tailing off. 53,000 people in England had the virus in their latest household survey. That's halved, down from 133,000 last week. In fact, the ONS says there is a steady fall now. More than 0.4% of the population were infected at the end of April. By the end of May, it was just 0.1%. Although there are still 5,500 people a day catching the virus. The latest estimate of the R number is 0.7 to 0.9, below the key threshold of 1, indicating that the spread of the virus is slowing. But these stats predate the easing of the lockdown earlier this week. We'll see in the coming days whether more social contact has increased spread of the virus.
But there you have it. I thought that was a nice video that showed quite a few statistics, and especially specific to the pandemic. This is a bit old. I was going to get a newer video. I didn't pick one yet. I didn't find one that I thought that was useful, but I thought that one was nice. So next question: can or should we all accept all statistics as truth? Should we do that? Should we just say, hey, if it's a statistic and somebody did the work, let's just accept all statistics as truth? What do you think? No, Donna says no. We shouldn't just accept it as truth. Anyone else? No? Jacob? Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in their opinion? What do you think? All right. Donna says need more data. Well, Donna, what if we had more data? What if we had all the data? What if we had the data and the statistics? Should we just accept it as truth? Okay, somebody gives us data, somebody gives us statistics. Should we just accept it as truth? Good suggestion, Jacob. All right, so here's my thoughts. So it's trust and validate. It's both. You both accept the statistics because it's information, right? But we do want to do some measure of validation associated with it, or trust but verify. So let's just go trust but verify. And of course, in some cases, it would be validate as well. So trust but or trust and validate. So you do both. You both receive the statistic. Just to receive it doesn't mean you're agreeing with it. And yes, Selena, timing does make a big difference on that. But know that we all have to accept, we don't have to accept it as truth, but we can accept the statistic as a statistic. And so, yes, it's a statistic. But should we verify? Yes. Do we have to do the verification? No, we can have trusted resources do verifications, like the introduction post when we talked about the Johns Hopkins COVID dashboard. If they're doing validation and they're a trusted resource, then we can reasonably rely on that information. Again, not as perfect truth, but not infallible truth, but certainly reasonable estimates based on the information that we're given. All right, and we're going to do another question. We're going to do another question on the live lecture quiz. And the question has to do with the emphasis of social construct, excuse me, the great emphasis on social constructs and the importance of engaging in vast social networks, the community, the country, the environment. What is that called? It's a definition of the emphasis placed on these constructs, and it's called the emerging workforce. The emerging workforce. So let me write that into the chat window so you have that available. And so again, what has placed this emphasis? It's called the emerging workforce, the great emphasis on social constructs and community, country, environment, etc. All right, good, good, good. So let's move on. Financial literacy, gross versus net profit. And so I'm just going to do a time check. It looks like we've got about 17 or so minutes left. I'm going to use all that time, and I do appreciate your time, your timeliness, your tenacity, everybody. And I'll get you that last question in the next 17 minutes. We're going to go through this next process to teach you about gross and net. Gross and net profit is in this week's assignment, so pay close attention to this. So gross sales, the total sales of goods or services without deductions. Okay, no deductions, no discounts, no price reductions, no returns. It excludes all those things. It's just the total sale. So if you sold something for $50 and you got $50, great. If you tried to sell it for $50 but got 25, the gross sale is still 50 because you're not including the discount that you gave. So gross sales doesn't mean you got that money. It just means that's what you tried to sell it for. Net sales is the actual cash in the door. And so let me mark this down as money collected. All right, so net sales is money collected, because gross sales, you might not have collected all the money because of a discount, because of a price reduction, because of some adjustment. You might not have collected all the money you wanted to, but the net sales you did, because that does include the discounts. It includes refunds. It includes allowances. So these deductions are actually subtracted from the gross sale, and that creates net sales. So gross is total based on gross retail price. Again, not necessarily what you sold it at, but certainly what you wanted to sell your products at or your services. And net sales is the actual money collected. So make sure you distinguish between those two things. And gross sales is typically not commonly reported. Net sales is more commonly reported. And then this is similar to net income and gross income. So gross income, think of it as your paycheck before any deductions. This is the gross amount of money you were paid before taxes, before Social Security, before any withdrawals. And then net income is the actual money you made or the company made. So gross income, gross revenue, gross profits before any taxes or any other deductions. And then, of course, net earnings is the actual money that you netted after your deductions and costs. All right, here's a video. We don't have time to watch this particular one, so I'm going to leave this in the PowerPoint for you. And so gross and operating profit, it's a nice video from Khan Academy for you, but I'm just going to leave it up to you to watch it on your own. All right, financial literacy. We're going to talk about principal interest, simple interest, and compound interest. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this. This is really something that you can do on your own, but it talks about when you are borrowing money or when money is borrowed or earned, there's a principal amount of money, and then there's interest associated with that. And then specifically a type of interest is a simple interest calculated by simply calculating the interest rate times the total amount of the loan or the amount of money you're trying to earn. And then compound interest is interest on interest. And again, these are just terms for you to introduce. And then there's formulas associated with this simple interest. And the simple interest formula here is the principal times the rate times the time. And so we'll get into a basic example that shows that. All right, so the steps in calculating simple interest is to find the principal. First, if you're going to determine the initial amount of money the interest will be based on, and then determine the interest rate has to be determined, and then the time, how long it's going to take to the interest to accrue, either if you're calculating interest that you're earning or interest that you're paying on a loan. And then, of course, the interest that you pay or you receive is the principal times the rate times the time. And so that's the formula that we talked about to get the amount of interest paid, not the interest rate. The rate is something we determine, but that's the amount. All right, so let's just spend a little time on this example to make sure these terms make sense. So a friend wants to invest a franchise and needs a loan. And so the principal amount that they need is $55,000. So great. $55,000, they're getting a loan. There's an interest rate that's determined to be 3%. So somebody made a decision to lend that money at a 3% rate. And so that is written as a decimal. So 3 divided by 100, because 100 is the basis of percentages, is 0.03. And so our friend said they would like us to pay the money back within the next 10 years. That's the time. Again, these were all predetermined numbers. 55,000 was predetermined, the 3% was predetermined, and the 10 was predetermined. Okay, so we've got those numbers here to our left. I just covered it, but 10 is what I was trying to identify. So let's go on and make the calculations. So the interest you're going to pay is the principal times the rate times the time. So we have the principal times the rate times the time, 55,000 times 0.03, that's the interest rate, times the 10 years. So you're going to pay $16,500 in interest. And if we add the interest to the amount that we borrowed, the principal, it comes out to $71,500. And so again, simple calculations. You may have already known this, but just to introduce this to you, because interest is a big deal. The average American pays an exorbitant amount of interest in housing costs, in car loans, in credit cards, in student loans. It's incredible the amount of interest that is paid through all of these things. So it's important to be aware of that. Another Khan Academy video that talks about word problems, specifically fractions and time. I'm going to leave this on your own to learn and kind of expand your learning. But again, we don't really have the time to spend doing that in our lecture today, because I want to get to the things that I wanted to get to for your learning on, specifically for the assignment this week. So Alex, gross and net sales. Alex is a salesperson for Harley Davidson. Alex sold 3 Fat Boy motorcycles in June. The bikes retail for $22,000 each. So one bike was priced with a $2,000 discount. So that means the price went down to $2,000. What was Alex's gross sales for June? Now remember, gross sales don't include discounts. So there it is, folks. Your gross sales is right there. Now you may say, but hold on, Mr. A, they didn't collect all that money because of the discount. I understand. But the gross sales is $66,000. So let's put that in. Sales is $66,000. Okay. Net sales, right? The net sales, if we were to identify that, we're a little ahead of ourselves, but the net sales would be down here, right? So this is net, because this is actual money collected, and up here is gross. Okay, so gross sales is what we would have wanted to collect. Alex would have liked to collect the gross amount. However, he didn't because of the discount. He didn't collect the gross amount for his company, or at least for the Harley Davidson company he works for. But he did collect $64,000. So net sales equals $64,000. And that's because of the discounts. So understand, the net sales is what he collected. The gross sales is what he wanted to collect. So again, this is just asking that question that we already answered. Net sales, right here, $64,000. Okay, scenario. Oh, hold on one second. Excuse me. I had to sneeze and I didn't want everybody to hear it. So if a bike sold for $22,000, one of his bikes was returned for a full refund. So $22,000 had to go back to the buyer and a full refund. What were the net sales for June? Well, the net sales changed, right? Money in the door went out the door. So you have to get rid of one of the bikes that sold for $22,000. So the net sales would be, hold on, or excuse me, the adjusted net sales. Let me get my little drawing. Here we go. Is 22,000 plus 20,000. So 42,000 would be the adjusted net sales for June. Why? Because a bike that sold for 22,000 was returned for a full refund. All right, so if that happened, net sales would reduce. What would gross sales be? It would still be 66,000. Isn't that interesting? It's still 66,000. Why? Why is it still 66,000? Because net or gross sales doesn't include discounts, returns, price adjustments. It doesn't include that. So the company's net gross sales is still 66,000. So let me mark that down. Gross sales, I'm putting this in the chat window, is still 66,000. However, the net sales reduced to 42,000 because one bike sold for full price was returned. There we go. All right, there you have it. All right, so that's gross and net sales. All right, housing cost percentages. Here's just an example of something where if we were asked to calculate 30% of our gross income and see what that would be based on for housing allowance. A lot of folks think that we shouldn't be spending more than 30% of our gross income on housing costs. So that's what would be determined. So if your gross income before taxes was $1,400 per month, and you thought 30% of your gross income was how much you should pay on housing, then we would just simply take that 14,000 and multiply it by 0.3. There we go. 1,400 times 0.3. So if you get your calculators out and you take 1,400 and you multiply by 0.3, you get $420. That would be your housing allowance if this were true. If you were making $1,400 per month, if you decided not to spend more than 30% of your gross income, you'd have $420 available for your housing costs, which isn't very much. A business owner pays her employee a monthly salary of $2,200 for a year. What's the gross annual income, right? Gross annual income, right? $2,200 a month. Okay, that's each month. Okay, so if we're going to calculate it annually, we have to multiply by 12. So we take 2,200, we get our little calculators, and we times by 12, and we get $26,400. All right, not bad. Again, some very basic calculations just to build a foundation for our understanding of these things. Okay, if the employee saved every dollar they earned, that would be the amount, that $26,400. Some more examples. I'm going to leave this up to you to research on your own and to watch these videos. We still got some more things to talk about, and so I want to make sure we get through those. But algebra word problems are really helpful. Gross and operating profits, and then growing a certain percentage. All good videos for you as references to further expand your knowledge and understanding. Some key words used in mathematics: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. This is good, again, for word problems. Excuse me. Just for understanding how something is explained and what mathematical symbol you should use in your calculation. All right, here's a question for you, and I'm going to get you the last piece of the live lecture quiz. So financials play a blank role in the success of a business. Financials play a blank role in the success of a business. What do you think is the answer to that question? What kind of role does financials play? What do you think? Key role. Thank you, Donna. I agree. Definitely a key role. We could use some other words. What other words can we come up with? So think of financials as making sure that you are profitable. That means the amount of money, the net sales of your products or your services exceeds the total cost of the business. That would be profitability. And so yeah, key would be a word. Vital, crucial, some big word, because financials, if they're not working for the business won't work. So very, very important. So be mindful of that, how important the role financials play. So resource allocation is our last piece of this puzzle for today's live lecture. And so resource allocation is basically assignment of available resources to various uses. And we already talked about project management and how those resources are aligned and allotted and prioritized. And so that's a big deal for major companies, but even smaller companies, they have to be mindful. And even in your own role, in your business, just resource allocation of your time and your energy and your priorities. And some video resources around this. Again, these are all things that you can expand your knowledge with on your own time, just available for you. And the decision-making triangle, I'm going to share this with you because this is something that helps us uh, simplify decisions. Well, first you have to define the problem, define the decision that needs to be made, identify possible solutions, and then select the best solution. And you might think, Mr. A, that's really pretty simple. Well, if we start here, even complex decisions can build on a simple premise. And so as long as we're doing a good job of defining what decision needs to be made, and the possible options, brainstorming those possible options, we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we do the analysis and the research necessary to select the best solution. And I thought this Thornton triangles of management was a big deal because it simplifies things. So Henry Mintzberg on the pattern of decision making. I was hoping to have time. I might come back to this depending on how much time we have left. So let's put this on hold for Mintzberg. I will get you the last Q&A for the live lecture quiz. Let me get past this here. Hold on a second.
Okay, I want to talk about management as a practice. I don't think management is a science.
Thank you, Henry. But we'll get back to that if there's time. So the last section, here we go. Manipulation and deception of numbers. Ways numbers can be deceptive. All right. Vital to understand the deception of numbers. This is when numbers can deceive. Numbers affect many aspects of our personal and professional lives. Yes, Mr. A, we all agree. Numbers are used to inform important decisions. Absolutely. Numbers track our economy. Huge. Numbers influence consumer purchasing. Without question, numbers prove or disprove theories like the effectiveness of the pandemic coronavirus vaccines. Absolutely. Numbers educate and inform. This is a big deal. So we have to understand that while we can receive statistics, while we can read about statistics, it is important to validate or verify or create some measure of trust around those statistics. 3 ways numbers can be deceptive. So this is one of our learning objectives for today. First, averages can be used to be deceptive or irrelevant. Outliers, remember those extreme values we talked about? They may skew an average. That means create a false picture of what is more likely the real number. And so understand the example that I gave about the average income versus the median income. It's not like one was false. It just was misleading to think that the typical household is making $90,000 because the average is being skewed or brought higher because of Bill Gates and all those folks making quite a bit of money. Secondly, quantitative data is not relevant due to time or place. If something happened 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, is it relevant today? And one example is Boeing's performance with the issues they've had with their recent jets and all the losses that occurred and the loss of life and the loss of their reputation or that has been hurt. I mean, so many changes simply out of 2019 alone. And they're trying to recover from that now. And it's a big company, it's a strong company, so they should recover, but it may take some more time. Quantitative data represents some facts, but not others. What about a construction bid that comes in for a project and it's half price? It's half price from all the other bids. Why is it so low? Well, guess what? After digging to validate, you found out the company used illegal resident labor. So those are the things that we have to understand to some degree to make us informed thinkers and allow us to create some validation, some measure of truth behind the data that we're using and better understand its sources and certainly understand the consistency between what we read and what is trusted. Just because we read it, it doesn't mean it's trusted. That's a very important difference. All right. I may show this graph. As a matter of fact, we do have time to see this. This is a great video. Let's check this out.
A toothpaste brand claims their product will destroy more plaque than any product ever made. a politician tells you their plan will create the most jobs. We're so used to hearing these kinds of exaggerations in advertising and politics that we might not even bat an eye. But what about when the claim is accompanied by a graph? After all, a graph isn't an opinion. It represents cold, hard numbers, and who can argue with those? Yet, as it turns out, there are plenty of ways graphs can mislead and outright manipulate. Here are some things to look out for. In this 1992 ad, Chevy claimed to make the most reliable trucks in America using this graph. Not only does it show that 98% of all Chevy trucks sold in the last 10 years are still on the road, but it looks like they're twice as dependable as Toyota trucks. That is, until you take a closer look at the numbers on the left and see that the figure for Toyota is about 96.5%. The scale only goes between 95 and 100%. If it went from 0 to 100, it would look like this. This is one of the most common ways graphs misrepresent data, by distorting the scale. Zooming in on a small portion of the y-axis exaggerates a barely detectable difference between the things being compared. And it's especially misleading with bar graphs, since we assume the difference in the size of the bars is proportional to the values. But the scale can also be distorted along the x-axis, usually in line graphs showing something changing over time. This chart showing the rise in American unemployment from 2008 to 2010 manipulates the x-axis in two ways. First of all, the scale is inconsistent, compressing the 15th-month span after March 2009 to look shorter than the preceding 6 months. Using more consistent data points gives a different picture, with job losses tapering off by the end of 2009. And if you wonder why they were increasing in the first place, the timeline starts immediately after the U.S.'s biggest financial collapse since the Great Depression. These techniques are known as cherry picking. A time range can be carefully chosen to exclude the impact of a major event right outside it. And picking specific data points can hide important changes in between. Even when there's nothing wrong with the graph itself, leaving out relevant data can give a misleading impression. This chart of how many people watch the Super Bowl each year makes it look like the event's popularity is exploding. But it's not accounting for population growth. The ratings have actually held steady because while the number of football fans has increased, their share of overall viewership has not. Finally, a graph can't tell you much if you don't know the full significance of what's being presented. Both of the following graphs use the same ocean temperature data from the National Centers for Environmental Information. So why do they seem to give opposite impressions? The first graph plots the average annual ocean temperature from 1880 to 2016, making the change look insignificant. But in fact, a rise of even half a degree Celsius can cause massive ecological disruption. This is why the second graph, which shows the average temperature variation each year, is far more significant. When they're used well, graphs can help us intuitively grasp complex data. But as visual software has enabled more usage of graphs throughout all media, it's also made them easier to use in a careless or dishonest way. So the next time you see a graph, don't be swayed by the lines and curves. Look at the labels, the numbers, the scale, and the context, and ask what story the picture is trying to tell.
I think the author did a super job of presenting what would be misleading simply because of presenting data that shouldn't be presented in the manner that it was. So yeah, so we're nearing the end here. I'm a little over on time, and I apologize for that, but I do want to get you some week one assignment tips. This is where you're calculating profit and loss for a company, and the CEO defines a good investment as one that gives a 10% profit. So what I'm going to do is just go through this quickly and give you some of the answers because you're given some information here, and we're going to calculate this together. So here are the assignment instructions. Step one is to calculate the gross sales. Remember, gross does not include any discounts, returns, any kind of price deductions, things like that. Secondly, what is the average price of the shirts that are sold? And then third, what is the most common price of the shirts that are sold? So let's get through some of these Q&A. So first, we're told 300 shirts were sold. Of course, you're the financial person who's trying to figure out these questions. And so we have to know how many total shirts were sold. Well, it's 300. 200 were sold at full price, $45 each. and 100 were sold at 25% off, $33.75. So that's a discount. Remember, that won't be included with the gross sales. The gross sales won't include that discount, but the net sales will. 7 were returned and then resold at 50% off at $22.50. Now we're going to make an assumption here, and the assumption is that those 7 shirts that were returned were originally sold at full price. So let me just mention that here. So originally sold at full price. Okay. So the 7 return shirts originally sold at full price. Very good. All right, so gross sales is the total number of shirts sold times the full retail price. No discounts, no returns, all of that's excluded. It's just the full retail price times the total number of shirts sold. Net sales is going to be your gross sales minus any discounts and returns. Average price, just you take your net sales, whatever you calculated for net sales, divide by the number of shirts sold, which was 300. And then the mode is the most common sale price. And so let's go through how to get some of these answers. So the first one is the gross sales is the number of shirts sold, 300 times $45. Now, Mr. A, does that mean we collected that money? No, that just means we would have liked to collect the money. $45 was the full price. We didn't collect that for all the shirts, but that's what we would have liked to have collected. That's gross sales. Net sales is what we actually collected. And so we had 193 shirts sold at full price. And now, Mr. A, wasn't it 200 shirts that sold at full price? Yeah, but we got to take into account that 7 of them were returned. Okay, 7 of them were returned. So we're going to do this inductively. We're going to calculate how much money came in the door. 193 shirts times 45, and then 100 shirts times 33.75, and then the 7 shirts that were returned, they were resold at $22.50. So if you calculate that, you'll have your net sales. And then just your net sales divided by 300 gets you your average price. So let me mark that to make sure that's clear. Take your net sales, and the net sales are simply coming from the previous question. And then the most common sale price, well, it's got to be the one that the shirts that sold for $45, right? So $45 is the most common sale price because 200 shirts sold at $45, or you could even say 193 shirts were sold at $45, but that's really just for the net sales calculation. Either way, $45 is the most common sale price or the mode. So we have that taken care of. And so next, we're writing a 250-word summary. Now, be mindful of your word counts. This is going to be a big deal when it comes to grading. Be mindful of your word counts for discussions. Be mindful of your word counts for these assignments. So 250-word summary of how this information could be used to make buying decisions for a business. Well, if we're in the purchase and resale of things, we have to make sure we're making a profit. It all comes down to profit. And so if we had to discount 107 shirts, was the purchase a good investment? Well, the CEO determined that a purchase is a good investment if there was a 10% profit. Well, let's see. So if profitability plays such an important role in business, let's see if it was a good investment. So let's check out how to calculate that. So first, the cost of the shirts was 300 times $12.50 because we were given that each shirt cost $12.50 to produce. And then we can calculate the revenue. Okay, we're going to take the net sales from the previous page. Remember, net sales we calculated previously on the previous slide, and the cost is right here of 300 times I'm going to connect the cost here. See the cost here. Connect those two. 300 times 1250. All right. Percent profit is simply the formula revenue divided by cost times 100. So whatever the revenue is, and again, we just calculated it. Okay, whatever that number comes out to be for revenue, divide by the cost. We're going to use the cost number here again in this formula. And then once you do that division, times by 100, and that'll be the percent profit. Okay. So that's it. If that percent profit is greater than 10, then you certainly have a good investment. So greater than 10%. then yes, good investment. Now, don't just say greater than 10%, yes, good investment. Talk about profits. Talk about the importance of profits. Talk about how all 300 shirts sold. Talk about how nearly 2/3 of them sold for full price. Talk about how only 7 of them were returned. Talk about how there wasn't really much of an inventory cost because if you purchased 300 shirts and then you sold them all, there really wasn't a lot of inventory costs. Then so really make sure you talk enough about these things in order to satisfy that 250 word summary of how that information that you used in this example could lead to the decision of a good investment. All right, I think that's all I have. Let me just double check. Yep, some career considerations. Here's where I'm giving you 3 scenarios to think about in your careers. If you're summarizing monthly performance of a sales teams, what statistics would you give? If you're doing hospital length of stay, like I gave in that example, would you use a mean or a trimmed mean? And then lastly, if you're a real estate agent, what neighborhood statistics could you provide property owners or buyers? And again, a bit of a lot of information this week, but I do appreciate your time and your timeliness and your tenacity. Thank you to all of you. If for any reason you didn't catch one of the Q&As for the live lecture quiz today, just send me a Canvas message and I'll get those out to you. Otherwise, have a fantastic week. And again, I'm going to send an announcement out to everybody that the live lab for today is postponed because Miss Adams is out of power, unfortunately. So be in thoughts for her and the people that are lost power throughout our country, and we'll get that rescheduled for you. All right, have a great week, everybody. I'm going to stick around and answer any questions you may have, but for now, I'm going to wish you well this week and contact me if you have any help that you need to be successful in your learning and performance. And I'll stop the recording. And again, wishing everybody a great week.